Pro. Established in 2011, it's no surprise that Estate Pros has grown each year and currently employs 10 team members. Karen has pursued skill development in both group processing and small group communications. She is dedicated to the ongoing training of employees and public education about the services related to the maturing process. Karen holds a bachelor's degree in radio and television communications, a master's degree in organizational communications, and a second master's degree in depth psychology. Please welcome Karen Hyatt to Hello. Well, hello, Karen. We really are
delighted.
We are delighted to have you here today. So we've got lots of questions to ask you. So let's get started. What motivated you to start Estate Pros 12 years ago?
Okay, great question. I was actually the manager of caregivers for a woman who actually died at the age of 101 and 5 months. And we should all die this way. She was totally with it until she took her last breath. And during her hospice process, I realized in working with the trust officers at the bank who handled her finances that they most likely would need some help handling her personal possessions. She had a small collection of jewelry, a small collection of Southwestern pottery. She had no children. She had outlived her husband by 30 years. And so I just said to the VP of the bank, hey, if you need some help, we'd love to help you. And in that process, I said to myself, I think there may be a place in the market for a service to service business. Because initially I was thinking if I started a small company to serve like banks and estate attorneys, then it would just be a service to business, or business to business service. And then I quickly learned after we started, within 5 months, I realized in our low population state, because New Mexico only has about 2,000 people in the whole state, that just would not sustain an ongoing business and certainly would not grow a business. So at that point, at about month 5, I started opening my marketing to direct to families. So I would go in and do presentations at 55 and older senior living facilities, as well as a lot of articles in newspapers and things like that.
I understand. You meant 2 million people, right? Not 2,000.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. 2 million. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to make that correct.
Yeah. No, thank you. You may need to do that a lot this morning. Correct.
No, not at all.
Thank you.
As you know, NASMM is you've been a NASMM member for 5 years now. You know that NASMM is the Professional Trade Association of Senior and Specialty Move Managers. And yet you are probably one of the only NASMM members, if not the only one, who actually has the word estate in their company's name. Please tell us how you think an estate pro, just like your name, is different than a senior move manager.
Okay, certainly. Part of it is simply, as you would say, if you were an author or a screenwriter, the POV, the point of view. But as I just shared, what motivated me to start the business was actually serving families and professionals who are dealing with estates. So, like any new business, we played around with different names: Estate Works, Estate Pros, Action Estate Pros. We went through a bunch of names, and we finally landed on Estate Pros. And are still actually just in the last few years trying to get a national trademark on that. The estate obviously indicates that our primary focus is handling the tangible personal property in an estate after someone dies. Now, how that may be different than many senior move managers is our focus. One of our ancillary services is senior moves. It just makes sense because you're serving the same population. And my guess is a lot of senior move managers have been asked to and are doing some semblance of estate distribution work, but probably their initial motivation or perspective was to come in and move seniors. So I think it's just an initial motivation, and then an ongoing, what is your main focus for the services you offer?
Oh, excellent. Yeah, that makes sense. Are estate distribution services different than after loss services? I'm seeing after loss services sort of emerging on the landscape of maturing services, as you like to call them, rather than aging services. Are after loss services different than estate just distribution services?
Oh, no, no, no. In fact, it's the same thing. I like to use estate distribution because it is the professional language of estate attorneys, trust officers, mainly those two professions. You will hear the legal language if you really commit to handling uh, estates after someone dies of tangible personal property, because that's how it's referred to in wills and legal documents. Like you would never see in a legal document after loss language. Now, I personally do like the language after loss as an addendum to estate distribution, because for me, it connotes more of a heart center and an interpersonal support system, as opposed to strictly handling the art, the couch, the furniture, the clothing. So I really encourage anyone who's starting to handle these services or offer these services to use the language of estate distribution, because one of your primary markets will be estate attorneys and trust officers, either from independent trust companies or trust officers in banks.
Absolutely. That makes so much sense to me. You're meeting them where they are.
Exactly.
Essentially. But
Exactly.
also after loss, you're meeting the family where they are. So
Exactly.
it's a great combo. It's a winning
Mhm.
combo. Our senior move managers tell us that some people believe they don't need a move manager to help them downsize because they don't have a lot of things. That's always a subjective area though, right? What one person thinks is a lot and what another. Does this happen in estate distribution work as well, where people believe low value estates don't need your services? But my guess is low value estates sometimes might actually offer the most family conflict and thus need for an objective third party like you. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, again, a really astute question. I think it's not just the value of the estate, which is crucial, um, but most families need some kind of support when it comes to handling all of the personal property in a home. Um, Honestly, when I go in for the initial assessment, I encourage, if a family's involved. Now, you see, in our peripatetic, society, most adult children don't even live near their dying parents anymore. So that's even a greater reason for us to offer this service. And so if, let's say if 3 adult children fly in for a long weekend, there's just no way they can handle everything in a home, even a small home, let's say 1,000 square foot apartment or 1,000 square foot home. And certainly if the home is 7 or 8,000 square feet, and they just don't know what to do with all those things. So actually an astute professional, estate distribution professional, can actually garner more money for the family to be shared, because they will know how and where to sell these items, both locally and nationally. But they can also handle items with more objectivity and not be so overwhelmed emotionally. And actually, I find that conflict in a family is often mollified by simply having a third party objective person present because everyone kind of likes to bring their best foot forward.
Sure, that makes sense as well. For senior move managers, a large number of your clients come from senior living communities, that is, independent and assisted living communities. Who most often refers families to you in your company?
Oh, well, especially if it's in a 55 and older community, I'm sure we get referrals from the very same people that all senior move managers do. As you all know, as well or better than I, there's usually a person on a staff named the resident services person. And that's a really good person for you to get to know if you don't already know them. Right now, just in one of our senior communities here in Santa Fe, in the last 3 months, we've done 8 move-ins and move-outs for this one facility. That's not even mentioning the others. So we feel like we kind of live there, on a daily basis. Jennifer, a point I want to make about senior facilities, they are so crucial. Again, and I'm sure senior move managers have found this across the board, but it really is true when you're also handling estate distribution. Often, like other senior move managers, we have moved, downsized and moved a person, an individual, or a couple from a 7,000 square foot home into a 2-bedroom independent apartment, and then stored a lot of things because the family doesn't know what they want to do with those things yet. And then that person needs to move to assisted living. We do that, and then that person dies. Well, it's at that point that we're the most benefit to the family. Sometimes they come to kind of do, have memorial services or whatever. But at that point, Estate Pros knows better what's in that storage unit than any family member. And so we can go in with a couple of family members and have them give directions in an hour or two. And then in the next few days, we distribute everything and ship it around the world. But it's that the resident services person who brings us the most referrals in that case.
In your senior move management business, what about the estate pro side of it?
Oh, no, same thing, because they know
Okay.
know we offer all of those services. It's the beautiful arc of services that we offer that really gives those professionals one call to make to meet all the needs of their residents.
I like the way you said that, the arc of services, because that's exactly what it is, the full continuum. For someone residing in their own residence at home, or they've passed away, who is the referral agent for you mostly? Is it wealth managers at banks? Is it estate planning attorneys? Is it all of the above? Is it?
You're right. It's all of the above. We've been in business so long now that after about year 5, we were getting referrals from neighbors, from people in their bridge club, the country club, you know how it goes. I mean, we're all a part of these social circles. And if you've done a good job, they're going to refer you to their buds. Now, of course, we all know if you don't do a good job, they're also going to be talking about you. That just happened to me, not a bad referral to us, but I had referred a client to 2 realtors that I thought would be really good for this particular estate. And wow, did I have an eye-opening response in an email from the executor on this estate. He said, I will never use so-and-so because, and of course, I don't get involved in that story because that's just not professional. But I say, well, thank you. You certainly don't need to use that realtor. But we all know the bad news travels just as fast or faster as the good news.
We all live and learn, right?
Yeah.
In both aspects of your work, in the estate part of it, as well as the senior move management part, you know that there are categories of baby boomer and older generation possessions that our children and grandchildren especially do not want. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, and again, I'm not alone in this. Senior move managers deal with this 6 and 7 days a week. It is just tough. As we all know, it's not just the style of furniture, meaning an antique from New England, it's the size of the furniture because especially the World War II generation had tended to choose these enormous pieces of furniture, and they're beautiful and they're still in great shape, but no one wants them now. And the younger generations just aren't living that way. Honestly, when I was at the convention for NASMM last October, I spoke with a young man who offers a totally different service than we do. He was one of your resources down, I forget what you call that room, but like the resources room downstairs. And this young man and I talked about starting to find ways to systematically distribute both non-trending furniture and furniture that is too large to people who might be homeless and getting back on their feet. They've now got a job, they're trying to outfit an apartment. And I've been working on that locally with a lot, meaning in New Mexico, with a lot of the immigrant people we have coming up from Central and South America into New Mexico. So it's just an ongoing issue.
Are there any, besides big furniture, what other things are you seeing? Like, China, crystal, those kinds
Yeah.
of things. What other things would you say you're seeing?
Well, of course, because you're asking the exact questions. China, crystal, and much silver just is not selling on the market anymore. Also, we were surprised to learn in January where now this may be different in different markets. I'm not really certain, but for the last, I don't know, 6 to 8 years, mid-century modern furniture was just booming in our market in consignment stores and also on estate sales. And so in January, we, without asking the consignment store owner, because we know her market, we sent her a lot of mid-century modern furniture without asking. She sent it all back. We were shocked because she said in the last year, it's quit selling. Now, again, Jennifer, I don't know if that's true nationally, but it certainly is in our market now. So we now have had to find a new place for mid-century modern. But of course, if there's the budget to ship certain items to a different region, sometimes you can ship things like mid-century modern back to Chicago and maybe still have a better market for it. Or certain kinds of antiques, if you can get it to Atlanta, but there's always a cost profit ratio there, and you just have to run the numbers. It may not be worth it to the family or the estate to ship items because it's too expensive.
Right. I'm just thinking as you're talking about mid-century modern, and near where I live is sort of a hub of that in the Chicago suburbs. And it seems like that would be a good category of furniture for transitional housing for people who are, perhaps, go in because of refugee status or, all kinds of opportunities for that people have for being, home insecure or whatever, that mid-century modern might be a great donation piece. Yes. Because the lines are so clean, it's so minimalist. It's not necessarily the heavy stuff of maybe the 30s and 40s, for example. Yes. The carved work, it's just minimal. And so that's something I'd like to just explore that a little bit more, later on outside of this interview. That it's just occurring to me now as you're talking about mid-century modern that if it has lost some value, it still can have value in our society, but with not a monetary, but as you say, that heart-centered approach, right?
Yes.
So, okay. You presented a session at the last NASM conference, and a few things struck me as I sat in the audience and listened to you. The first is the important work you are doing for families beyond move management. It really was impressive to me. The second is that you noted that you and your team never say these two words, stuff and hoarder or hoarding. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I sure can. And among ourselves, we also try not to use that language, but it just comes out sometimes. That's just the way it is. First of all, hoarding. Obviously, in the psychological language, clinical language, hoarding is a legitimate term. But the reason we don't use it is because family members are so ashamed of their parents who have been hoarders. And often from even an initial call, and I'm sure senior move managers experience this also, but often a grown daughter, meaning someone who's mid-50s or in her 60s, will say, well, I really won't want to take you into the third bedroom because my mother was a hoarder and everything is in there. And again, I don't use the word hoarder back to her, but I try to reassure her that it's not a problem for us and that there's no judgment from us. I try to use euphemisms, but you also want to be careful about a euphemism because sometimes a euphemism can be condescending without you intending it. So for instance, there was a man had died south of Albuquerque on what would be called a small ranch. And not only did they have a barn and corral and a ranch house, but he had what his still living wife called a 2,000 square foot man cave. And it was just the place, his workshop, but he clinically would be diagnosed as a hoarder. And when I first went in there to look with her at what he had collected through the years. And of course, anyone who's dealt with hoarding knows that often people who have this syndrome will order, and never even open the package. So there's just package after package sitting on shelves, never having been opened. But at one point I said to her, because this man had categories of things, computer equipment, antiques, workbench tools, woodworking tools. And I said to her, you know, your husband was a very curious man. And so curiosity can be a euphemism for hoarding, but you don't want to use it in a way that the remaining spouse or family member would think you were kind of making fun of them. But I do use the word curious or curiosity a lot with families. It's just so shameful because a lot of times a 50-year-old has grown up as an 8-year-old, not bringing their friends over to their house because their parents were hoarders. I'm forgetting what the other word is that you asked me that I try not to.
Oh, stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We try not to use the word stuff just because, let me back up. We use a lot of times language of stewardship in our promotional materials and in our educational presentations in the community. And by stewardship, I mean, we commit to being good stewards of their family memories that are held in these objects, and it carries their legacy forward. So the language of stewardship connotes respect, honor to the family. When you start saying, well, let's get rid of this stuff, it's just dismissed and people begin to think you're just hauling it out to a truck, whereas we are really handling each item the best way we know how, whether it's going to be sold, donated, if it's recycled, or refuse at the end.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. You know, within NASM, we always, say that one thing that senior move management does so well is we honor the home.
Mm,
That 42-year home ownership of those
mhm.
individuals living there, building their families there, that it can't be downsized or marginalized in 48 hours. It took 42 years. And so I love how not using the word stuff honors what's inside that home, because there was a lot of emotion and feeling besides a lot of material possessions about that home. So good job. You say that an area of your business that's increased quite a bit over the years is your home inventory service.
Mm,
What goes into a home inventory, and why do you think you're doing it more now?
yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say, and I don't know if she's on this Zoom call, but Carol Kaufman, who has developed Pinventory, has just developed an amazing software for handling inventories for senior move managers. When I first started this business almost 13 years ago, I never thought we'd be doing an inventory. It wasn't on our list of services. It just never crossed my mind. But immediately, especially attorneys and trust officers started asking us to create an inventory, either of everything in the home, because there might be conflict among family members and they needed the paperwork as a baseline, or they might just want us to inventory the art or the mother's jewelry or whatever it might be. But in the last 5 to 6 years, oh my goodness, Jennifer, we do so many inventories. And what I'm learning, and again, we're still asked to do the inventories by estate attorneys and trust officers. They are experiencing more and more conflict among family members, which is really sad. But obviously, as a fiduciary of that family and that estate, they need the paperwork as a baseline, because maybe their client actually hasn't died yet, but the attorney has interacted with the adult children and knows it's just going to be Mount Vesuvius once that person dies. So they need a baseline of what's in that home to be able to track things so that things don't walk out of the home or get stolen. So I can only share with you why we are asked to do more and more inventories. And this is no small matter. We, in the last 3 months, were hired by a major law firm in New York City to inventory everything in a home in Santa Fe. And this decedent actually owned 3 homes across the country. And so the Santa Fe home was only one home that they were inventorying. They hired different people for each market to do the inventory, obviously. But it was in that case, not because of family conflict, but because it was such a high value estate. They needed that inventory for any questions the IRS might be asking. But in most, even though Santa Fe is a small community, we only have 85 or 88,000 people in our county. But as you know, and anyone knows, Santa Fe is the 3rd largest art market in the country. So we have a lot of high value homes in our county. And so we do that a lot, but mainly it's to guard against family conflict.
Great, thank you. Makes sense. So I'm sure each day and each client is different. Just can you walk us through a typical day in your work life? Just sort of a highlight some things. What does it look like to be an estate pro?
Okay. Well, of course, it's different for me as the owner than it is for one of my estate pros who's out on an estate today. So I'll run through a couple of them. Typically, my day starts really early because I'm a morning person and I do the best work on details first thing in the morning. But after I've gone to the gym, done that whole deal, I come in, I often will write proposals. The promise I make to anyone after I get an initial call, I set a time to meet the client in the home for me to do an on-site assessment. I created my own assessment form years ago. And I promised them that I will send them a written proposal within 2 days of that assessment. So I often am writing proposals first thing in the morning. Now, I'm currently training 2 employees to do assessments and to do proposal writing, which then of course becomes the contract, blah, blah, blah. So after I've written proposals, I often then am out the door doing assessments, meeting clients. And also almost every day I'm doing some kind of marketing, either taking a client to lunch or to coffee or making a presentation in the community. Now, just quickly, I want to say that my estate pros, meaning what we call a regular estate pro, a person who works on the estate to do the organization, packing and distributing, we also have a leader of that team, which we call a site facilitator. Now, the reason we call them a site facilitator is because that person is very key in communicating with an array of people outside of the team. That could be the attorney, the family, the realtor, the stager that's coming in, maybe an inspector, maybe someone who's going to relay the bricks in the patio. And so they're always facilitating and orchestrating a whole array of activities. But today, for instance, I have one estate pro continuing to settle a woman in her new assisted living apartment, but I have 6 estate pros at an estate about 30 minutes north of Santa Fe, and they are packing things to ship to 6 beneficiaries across the country. So that's kind of the difference between what I do and what a regular estate pro does.
Wow, it sounds like a lot. Without revealing any confidential details, tell us one of your most memorable estate distribution stories.
Oh my goodness. Well, I have many.
I'm sure you do.
And again, I have to identify with all my peer senior move managers because we all could write books, as you know, because sometimes it's characters that we're dealing with. Sometimes it's like, oh gosh, I can't wait for this to be over. But honestly, in almost 13 years, I've only had 3 clients that I kind of hope I never see again. And not to be rude, but they were just challenging. That's just all there was to it. Right now, we've just started a new estate, and I can't say the name of this gentleman, but he is the man who died is a world famous author and a Pulitzer Prize winner. So that's always fascinating when you get to work with someone. I don't mean it from an egotistical standpoint, but when you get to work with someone or their possessions, who's lived such a large life. And he's actually our 2nd Pulitzer Prize winner. The other one had developed, and I can't say what, but he had developed a chemical thing where he won a major prize. And so to handle these gold medallions, with their certificates out of the safe, that's just always really kind of cool. And then these people often have just fascinating libraries. But I want to share with you the hardest estate I ever worked with was because of emotional reasons. As you can imagine, when you're working with estate distribution, you're almost always working with adult children, someone in their 50s, 60s, even 70s, whose parent in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and 100s has just died. So the discussion with a 65-year-old about what china they're going to keep or what crystal they want to sell is very different than this one. I was called one day by a social worker who happens to be a very dear friend of mine. And she had been called in because a 17-year-old girl and a 14-year-old boy had been left because their mother committed suicide. And they needed us to go in and handle everything in the home in dialogue with these children. Well, that's just a very different conversation that I facilitated with those teenagers than it is a 65-year-old, because most of us at 17 don't know if we do want our mother's kindergarten books that she had when she was 5 and 6, or we don't know if we want to keep the family china that is handed down for 3 generations. So I found myself trying to be sensitive and kind, yet facilitating things in a much more careful way than I typically do with a 70-year-old. And I'm happy to say those children are thriving. They were actually adopted by this social worker friend of mine. And one is now graduating from graduate school, and her younger brother is in his 3rd year of undergrad school. And they're both just thriving. But you can imagine what a trauma that was for those teenagers.
Wow, that must have been so challenging for you and clearly memorable. There
Yeah.
was no adult in the room per se, right? No adult point person, or was it just an
Well,
attorney or?
each child had already had I'm not certain if this is the legal language, but it would be considered a temporary guardian. So there were 2 temporary guardians that the court had already appointed by the time we did the walkthrough. But the guardians really stepped back in that process. Obviously, they were there to protect the interests of the children, but they didn't have any reason to mistrust me or the process. So they really stepped back and just allowed me to facilitate that dialogue. But yes, those temporary guardians were with us every time I met with those kids.
Well done. And it's lovely to have a happy ending so far.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
likely have contacts all over the country for various types of collections and memorabilia. How did you develop those contacts?
Well, you know what? You just, as every senior move manager does, you ask all of your colleagues, all of your friends, you just pull out the stops every day on whatever you're needing. It just so happens a few years ago, gosh, now, the pandemic has distorted time for all of us, but I'd say 6 years ago, we were handling an antique Asian pottery collection from the 16th and 17th centuries of Japan. Yeah, it was phenomenal. And we were also given the appraisal by a New Mexico appraiser whom I had never worked with before, which was kind of a first yellow flag for me, because again, in such a small state, I've worked with basically everybody who's an appraiser or does that kind of work. And I didn't know this person, so I wasn't certain I could trust her values. But I called another appraiser colleague of mine and said, who can I go to for this antique Asian pottery? And she knew of an appraiser in Florida. So we worked with him. We didn't have to ship him the pieces of pottery. We just sent him portions of the appraisal document. And sure enough, this original appraisal had been inflated terribly. And I'm sure it wasn't out of any kind of malice or, wanting to cause harm. I think she just did not know what she was dealing with. And so we have that contact through a private independent trust company here, we met a man who is an art consultant in New York City. And we have developed such a trusted relationship, professional relationship through the years, that now whenever we touch those very unique pieces of art or an artifact, if it deserves an international audience for an auction, I'm calling Ron, in New York. So how does it happen? It's just need initiates the call. And then you have to kind of do your due diligence to make sure who you're calling is credible. Are they trustworthy? And because even locally, if you're a plumber, if you misstep once with us, we just can't use you again, because our clients are trusting us to protect them and their estate. So we hold a pretty high bar on those referrals.
Thank you. You always are working around, or mostly working around, a lot of grief, from what it sounds like. What kind of a toll does that take on you and your staff? Do you experience what's called compassion fatigue?
Yeah. And I can tell you right now, I'm terrible at taking care of myself when it comes to that. You're right. We are always working in an emotional environment of grief. And most senior move managers are also, and they will tell you that, because if they're moving a senior into assisted living, that senior, although still living, has experienced loss cognitively, mobility, whatever. And so all of us are always absorbing grief and the darker emotions. Now, I will say that caring for people who are grieving is actually what drew me to this service. It's not because I love objects or because I love Asian antiques. I do like them, and I appreciate the aesthetic quality and the family history they carry, but it's really that person-to-person relationship that draws me to this service. So we do 4 trainings with our staff, the whole staff, a year. In fact, Friday, we're having kind of a 3/4 day staff training, and at least once a year, it involves how to be with grief, language to use, how to take care of ourselves, how to use language, sit and be present with the person who's grieving. So we try to really support myself and my staff with training. Now, I will say that sometimes it sneaks up on you. One day, this happened years ago, one of my most experienced estate pros called me before 7 a.m, weeping, and said, "Karen, I can't go back to work with so-and-so today." And of course, my first response was, "Well, you don't have to, so just know that. But tell me what's going on." And she had just become worn down from the grief that this woman was experiencing. And this woman was lovely. But she was just carrying a lot of grief. And so just quickly, within the next 30 minutes, not only did I change my whole day and said, "Don't worry, I'm going to come, I'll take care of it," but I called 2 other estate pros to work with me. Now, what I've worked with my staff to do better through the years is to see that coming. Because, of course, if you're in a management position, and sometimes I don't see my own grief building up, but if you're in a management position or the owner, you need some warning if one of your employees is wearing down emotionally or physically. And through the years, this particular estate pro has gotten so much better. And she'll call me, 3 or 4 days ahead and say, "You know what, can I have Thursday off because I need a break?" And then I'll continue with the client, whoever it is. And also, I try not to schedule down a downsizing job right next to a downsizing job for any one estate pro, because that's exhausting. And any senior move manager would tell you that. I think downsizing is the hardest part emotionally about this whole thing, which isn't just estate distribution related. It's a senior move managers doing that every day.
That kind of answers my next question, which is, what is your greatest challenge as an estate pro / senior move manager?
Yeah.
It's the back-to-back downsizing, you would say.
For us, it really is. And, Jennifer, I want to say, I'm sure there are many people on this call and who are senior move managers who are just more accomplished at self-care than I am. I'm pretty intense, and people tease me about being a type A. I say, oh no, I've softened. I'm only an A- now. But it's really hard for me to kind of even see myself wearing down. And I'm sure there are senior move managers who could enlighten us much better than I could.
If we could time travel back to 2011, what is different about your business now than when you first started?
Oh, wow. What a great question. Well, first of all, even though I personally work in the world of the unknown every day, because you just never know what's going to come your way. Honestly, Jennifer, when I first started this business, I did not have a clue what I was opening myself to. And of course, well, not of course, when I first started it, I literally just called 4 of my dear friends who were kind of in transition professionally and said, look, I'm starting this business. Do you want to come on board for a while? And then when publishing opens up again for you or whatever, you're welcome to move on. So I started, actually, I think there were 5 of us initially on our first 2 jobs. But my staff has changed tremendously, although I still have one person who's been with me since day one. I have 2 other people who've been with me since year 1, and that's wonderful to have those loyal people. I'd say management and growth, huge changes since those first years. And management is not my favorite thing. I do it because, I can't afford to hire someone else to do it, but that's not my long suit at all. And also, I so rely on my employees. They know so much more of doing this job in the field now than I do, because I am almost never on site anymore. I'm getting jobs, I'm executing jobs, I'm organizing, I'm training new people, all of that. I'm marketing, of course. But I totally rely on the feedback for any job execution with my employees. They are just stellar human beings.
Oh, that's great to hear. I have many more questions to ask you, but we're going to have to invite you back for a part 2 sometime down the road. I'm going to bring in my colleague, Jennifer Pickett, and she will take it from here. I think we've got some questions in the queue for you now, Karen.
Oh, yeah, we sure do. We have a couple of questions. We get a lot of referrals for estates from our local funeral homes. Do you find that helpful for you?
I do. And in fact, in previous years, we've actually courted the funeral homes and done presentations. We have really fine PowerPoints we've developed. So we like to do PowerPoint presentations to their staffs. Just one other thing on that, though, we're really fortunate in New Mexico. We have a woman who's created an entire service around death and dying. And she speaks nationally and is a published author, and we're associated with her. And so we're a corporate sponsor of a lot of the festivals she holds. So we're hitting that same market without necessarily going to the funeral homes.
Okay, here's another question. Do you know if there are places that would distribute unwanted items nationally?
I don't, is the short answer. That's part of this dialogue I started with this young man at the conference last October, and we have continued to talk about it. We don't know what that's going to look like yet. Usually cost is the barrier there.
Mm-hmm. What does it mean that you are the doyen of death? I apologize if you addressed this. I was a few minutes late joining.
Okay, well, am I on mute?
No?
Okay, so you can hear me, right?
Mhm.
Okay, well, I'm not the doyen of death. That's actually my colleague in Albuquerque, New Mexico, who calls herself the doyen of death. She is hysterically funny. She's like a stand-up comic when it comes to working with death and dying, but she's the colleague I was just referring to, who is an enormous resource about the whole field of death and dying. But that's not me.
Okay, that is the last of the questions that we have. So with that, I will thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Mary Kay. Thank you, Karen. And everyone have a great rest of the week and a happy 4th of July.